the greatest recession in a generation, the only answer my friends on the other side seem to have is to dismantle any government regulation intended to protect our nation's public health and environment. This, Mr. Speaker, is economic extremism. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent.
Mr. Speaker, I've sat here and I love listening to my friend from Florida, Mr. Hastings. We talk about the EPA and what this rule and underlying legislation will do. What they fail to point out is that any member, Democrat or Republican, as it relates to any issue that this rule and the underlying legislation will address, has the ability to submit an amendment process that allows us, if the bill is flawed in their estimation, submit an amendment, bring it up for the House, have a debate on it. Let's talk about it. There are ways to fix legislation, not just kill it. There are ways that we can do things as it relates to, business. And we talk about the ability for these companies. I will tell you that I got a different flavor on it, not from the EPA. Of course, they have their own take on what's going to work and what isn't going to work. But I've heard from actually manufacturers that it will cost jobs. It will be to their advantage, if they want, to actually load up their stuff, put it on a truck, and take it to Mexico where there is no air quality standards at all. None. And we'll breathe that air forever. We brought up about, my good friend brought up about Cutco, and I really need to talk about that. First of all, H.R. 2681 and 2250 fully comply with the rules of the House, including Cutco. The CBO cost estimates clearly state that neither of these bills affect direct spending. While it may actually force the EPA to revisit the rule, they have the staff to do it. It's not like it's a new mandate to them. It's not a new program. It meets within the majority leader's legislative protocols, including discretionary Cutco. These bills do not authorize any new appropriations, which is one of the tests for discretionary Cutco. These bills do not create any new program or office. That's an additional test on discretionary Cutco. And rulemaking is a basic function of federal agencies, and particularly the EPA, so they certainly have the staff available to do it without an additional cost. That's part of what their job is. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to my friend, gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You must have had an awfully tall fellow down here before me. I thank my friend from Florida for yielding me the time. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope you will challenge the American people to watch this debate that happens over the next hour. Because I'm down here as a freshman to tell you this is exactly what is supposed to be happening in the U.S. House of Representatives. This is what is supposed to be happening in the People's House. I hold in my hand the committee report. The committee report from H.R. 2250. It was introduced by a freshman from the southwestern corner of Virginia, who introduced it, Mr. Speaker, because he's worried about jobs in his district. You are not going to find, and I challenge you to find, a single member who comes to the floor to say my freshman colleague introduced this bill because he has any motivation other than the best interests of the men and women and families that live in his district. Now understand that. Introduced this bill that we're going to discuss if this rule passes because he is concerned about the men, women, children, the families in his district. That's why this legislation was introduced. He introduced this legislation over the summer, June 21st. On September 8th, the subcommittee that deals with this legislation had a hearing. September 8th, had a hearing. And on September 13th, a week later, reported out this bill through the regular subcommittee process. We go on, Mr. Speaker, September 20th, the full committee had hearings, markups on this bill. met in open markup session, and on September 21st reported out this bill, printed this committee report online for all of America to read. And today, if the rule as proposed by my friend from Florida passes, we're going to allow any member of this House, any member, Republican and Democrat alike, to offer any changes that they propose. Any changes. All they have to do, we gave notice of that a week ago today, all they have to do is preprint their amendment in the congressional record, submit it by the close of business tonight, so that all members will have a chance to read it and consider it thoughtfully. Mr. Speaker, that is how this House is supposed to run. Regular order, regular process, hearings, markups, and allowing any member to have their say. Now, nevertheless, this rule is being challenged and urged for its defeat because folks don't like the underlying idea. That's a real frustration for me, Mr. Speaker, because I grew up in a nation where we disagree about things from time to time, and that's okay. And what we do is we disagree about them, and then we bring them to the House floor for a vote so that America gets to decide. I am the voice for 921,000 people in Georgia, and I can only speak for them when I have a vote on the House floor. This rule provides that any amendment offered by any member of this body gets to have the voice of my 921,000 constituents heard. This is the way it's supposed to be run. I came, Mr. Speaker, from a press conference earlier with about half the freshman class urging the Senate to take up legislation, job-creating legislation, that is just sitting there in the Senate. Senate won't take it up. Why? Perhaps because folks don't like the ideas in their entirety. Mr. Speaker, I recommend they amend them, that they adopt our process of amending bills in a way that the people's voice gets to be heard. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to talk about it. We have to move that legislation forward, and we have to get the American people's work done. It's not optional, Mr. Speaker. If you didn't want to get the American people's work done, you shouldn't have signed up for the job. And come next November, you have a chance to go back home. But if you want to get the people's work done, this is the right process to do it. Mr. Speaker, all jobs are not created equal. I challenge anyone to come to the floor of the House and tell me that jobs are not going to be destroyed. Manufacturing jobs, good-paying manufacturing jobs, destroyed by the implementation of this rule. Now, we're going to create some other jobs. All the moving companies who move folks out of their house in my district when their homes get foreclosed on because they lost their jobs, those jobs are going to be created. We're going to create some jobs with these rules, but not the kind of jobs that I know we want, we collectively want. This bill has a lot of common ground in it, Mr. Speaker, and we have an opportunity in this process to find that common ground. You know, folks tell this as a tale of Republicans out to get the EPA. Nobody loves clean air more than I do. Nobody loves clean water more than I do, and I would argue no one participates in the outdoors more than I do. But the EPA asked, Mr. Speaker, that they have more time to finalize this. They said, we don't have time to get it right. Can we have more time? And you know what? The court got involved and said, no, you cannot. No more time for you. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because the Congress said no. Today, the Congress has an opportunity to say yes, Mr. Speaker. I rise in full support of the rule and the underlying legislation.
Time of the gentleman's expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Speaker, I guess it's my prerogative to assist in correcting a couple of measures. I kind of wish my good friend, and he is, and he's going to be a real asset to our institution as an institutionalist. And I'm referring to my friend, Mr. Woodall from Georgia. He and I enjoy quite a tete-a-tete in the Rules Committee. It's just that when he puts forward his proposition, I wish he had that same fervor with all of the closed rules that we have had in the House up to this time. And one half of all of the rules we've promulgated until today have been under closed rules. This one is a modified open rule, and yes, you're correct, members can come down and they can go forward. If yesterday they knew today that they had to meet by the close of business the amendment process. I see my friend would like for me to yield. I'll be happy to yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Of course, the Rules Committee sent out a dear colleague a week ago alerting them that they had until tonight. And I say to my friend, I think you're absolutely right about the need for even more openness in this House. Of course, we only had one open rule in the last Congress.
Absolutely.
As a part of this freshman class, we're making progress. I look forward to working with you to make even more progress, and I hope, since we can agree this one is done right, that we can come together, vote in favor of this, and then look forward to our next challenge. I thank
Reclaiming my time. I can't agree that this one is done right because it's a modified open rule. It's not an open rule, and you know that as well as do I. But more important, I want to refer to my good friend from Florida as well when he said that cut-go is not applicable in this particular situation. I disagree. And I think what needs to be understood by my colleague, Mr. Nugent, is that we don't make these rules here in the House. The protocols have been established early on, and we don't say what CBO needs to do. I think all of us are agreed that CBO is a nonpartisan requirement group that estimates for us what would be the net cost of legislation. In this particular measure that we are considering, 2681, CBO estimates that implementing 2681 would have a net cost of $1 million over the next 5 years. The cost of this legislation fall within Budget Function 300, Natural Resources and Environment. Now then, I repeat the protocols enunciated and promulgated by the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor. Any bill or joint resolution which authorizes the appropriation of funds for any new agency, office, program, activity, or benefit shall also include language offsetting the full value of such authorization through a reduction in the authorization of current ongoing spending. Now, that just is not happening here, and cut-go, although applicable, is being waived, I guess. At this time, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oregon, my good friend and classmate.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy in permitting me to speak on this. And I must say I could not agree more with the gentleman from Florida about if we were really concerned about creating job opportunities and strengthening the cement industry, we would be moving forward with legislation to rebuild and renew America, to deal with crumbling roads, inadequate transit systems, unsafe bridges, water and sewage, treatment plants that need investment. Sadly, what we have seen since the new majority assumed office, that in fact they have been involved with a series of initiatives that actually are cutting back on that initiative, that are reducing resources for infrastructure at exactly the time when America needs it the most. Now, I'm sorry, but this bill, it continues an agenda that we heard articulated a great deal last week that is not willing to take the 21-year delay from the amendments to the Clean Air Act and move forward to have something in effect by 2013. They want to delay, to start over in many of these cases. Now, remember, in 1990, we amended the Clean Air Act to require these regulations to be completed by the year 2000. But a combination of the Republican takeover of Congress and then foot-dragging by the Bush administration meant that we weren't ready. When they came up with something out of the Bush EPA, it was inadequate, and the courts threw it out. Well, we're back trying to deal with this responsibility. Now, their concern was raised about who cares about people in their districts. Well, I would be prepared to argue that anybody ought to look at the research that's available. Look at the tens of thousands of lives that will be impacted. 6,600 lives every year will be saved under the Boiler Act. 2,500 lives a year under the cement legislation per year. This affects people in every district. Massive health care savings across America from people that won't be subjected to those conditions. If you care about people that you represent, you ought to factor in these health considerations. Now, this legislation requires EPA to toss out work that it has already done and replace it with a standard that would be select the least burdensome standard, including the work practice standard, which are only a requirement to keep the equipment in working order and regularly turned up. If we had adopted that initiative, that philosophy, 20 years ago, tens of thousands of people would have died. May I?
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
But we didn't. We moved forward. And in fact, the record shows, despite arguments like we've heard today, there were tens of thousands of jobs created complying with the Clean Air Act requirements. But what would they do here? You know, as my good friend from Florida pointed out, there are many in the industry that are already complying. They've seen the handwriting on the wall. They want to be good citizens. Or there is pressure locally to clean up their act. This bill would reward the people who are dragging their feet and have the dirtiest plants and equipment, and penalizes the people who are being responsible environmental stewards. You know, my friends on the other side of the aisle oftentimes adopt rhetoric that the 17,000 men and women who work in EPA are the enemy of the American people, are the enemy of the economy. Well, I suggest they ought to get acquainted with some of their constituents who work for the EPA and work to make sure they have that they have the resources to do their jobs right and to stop making them political footballs. I've had my disagreements over the years with EPA, but I respect the men and women who work there. I understand the pressures they're under, and Congress is not helping them do their job any better. And this would be a dramatic step backward. Mercifully, it won't go anyplace in the Senate, and the President would veto it anyway, but we should understand what is going on.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to remind my colleagues that this does not violate Cutco clearly on its face. As he said, making my point, that this does not authorize any new spending, not a penny. And with that, I want to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes, without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to come down here to thank the Rules Committee for the modified open rule and a chance for us to go through this bill bit by bit, amendment by amendment, to address concerns that my friends on the other side might have about this. And I'm following my good friend from Oregon, and I appreciate his passion. But I come to the floor to talk about the jobs. And the EPA, who I also rally against numerous times, produced the cross-state air pollution rule in July. The result of that is 2 power plants in Illinois are closing. One is 369 megawatts. The other one is 302 megawatts. That means 671 megawatts of baseload power is going to be offline. If you understand supply and demand, less supply, similar demand or higher demand, higher cost. So it's very easy to project higher energy costs for everybody across this country because of that rule. Secondly, the job losses. In the first plant, 14 management and 39 union represented employees will lose their job. That's at plant number 1. Plant number 2, 8 management and 29 union represented employees will lose their job. We do this, and we come down and we have these debates on the role of the EPA so that we can have the debate about jobs in this economy. This is not the time. In fact, I've asked the President, the best thing he could do for his own reelection and for the country is stop doing things. Put a hold on new rules and new regulations. Let the economy recover. Let's keep people back to work. Let's make these power plants that are employing these folks still have jobs. Let's make sure the tax base in these small rural communities that these power plants pay taxes to still have that property tax revenue going. So this is just, Boiler Mac is another example of what we did last week, and these effects on job losses are real. This announcement was done today. Boiler Mac will affect a lot of municipal power plants who have a contractual obligation with their citizens saying, we will locally produce power. And so they're breaking contract with their citizens. The Cement Mac is another example of, we talked about jobs and infrastructure, the result of these cement plants closing is that we will import cement. Would I last another 30 seconds?
Another 30 seconds, Mike.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
And I would just ask my friends, does that make sense that we are going to now import cement at higher cost for countries who aren't complying with these rules and regulations? I think not. This debate is about jobs and the economy. Now is not the time to ratchet down these rules so we make it more difficult to create jobs, keep jobs, and grow this economy. And with that, I thank my colleague, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Speaker, I would just remind my friend that when plants like he referenced are closed, it doesn't mean that the demand is not still there. And what happens is it means that new plants are being built. And guess what happens when you build new plants? You use steel, you use cement, and you have jobs. So I'm not certain that the analogy that he put forward holds in that case. I would urge my friend from Florida to know that I have no further speakers at this time. I'm prepared to close whenever you're prepared to go forward.
I thank my friend from Florida, Mr. Hastings, for that. The last member that spoke talked about closing of coal-fired electric plants. You know, it was amazing that the President just last month put in abeyance an EPA rule as it related to just that issue. Put in abeyance that rule because he said that it was going to cost jobs at a time when we can least afford closing plants and cutting jobs. The President gets it, and I applaud him for doing just that. You know, on the other issue, well, let me get to this. I am prepared to close. Mr. Speaker, you know, I support this rule and encourage my colleague. I'm sorry, you close first. My apologies to my good friend from Florida.
Mr. Nugent, reserve his time.
9 months on the job, and we still have, we want to get the job done. And so I will allow, obviously, my good friend from
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
I thank my friend, and at this time I am, Mr. Speaker, prepared to yield myself such time as I may
Gentleman's recognized.
Use. Mr. Nugent and I are from Florida. The largest supplier of energy, electricity, specifically in Florida, is a company known to he and I as Florida Power and Light. Mr. Nugent probably does not remember that I ran for the Public Service Commission in the state of Florida to deal with regulatory matters and to address the ongoing concerns. And much of what we talked about at that time, in addition to 2 lawsuits that I had filed in my community, was about coal-fired electric generating plants. Florida Power and Light, being an extremely responsible energy producer, has taken it upon itself to eliminate much of their coal-fired activity. And in spite of all of these regulations and the alleged uncertainty and everything having to do with it, they now are using gas-fired facilities and working on trying to reduce emissions, period, and have no problems. The largest electricity producer in this country is Exelon, which has no power. They come from Mr. Shimkus, the gentleman that just spoke, territory in Illinois. That's where they are based, and they have no concerns with complying with these regulatory matters. Now, one thing I heard about cement being imported, the reason for that is the low demand. And if my governor and some of these other governors would get off the dime and go about the business, and if this Congress was to go about the business of implementing the infrastructure provisions that are offered in the Jobs Act of the President, then we would use more cement and we wouldn't have to get any from anywhere, as we have not in the past when the economy has that kind of demand. Now, for people who believe in the Republican anti-government, the EPA is the evildoer of the world doctrine found in many of these bills, and I might add we will see more of this according to the majority leader. We are going to demonize EPA. Those 17,000 employees, I found it ironic that someone commented ago that they have enough staff in order to be able to do it, while at the same time, every time we look to cut some agency, we're cutting EPA, and many people in the Republican Party have used as their mantra the elimination of the EPA. So I don't know that they could offer any kind of regulation on the Clean Air Act or anything else. But I offer to them these suggestions. If you don't like regulation, don't drive on roads, don't fly, don't go to national parks, don't worry about listeria in cantaloupe and lettuce, don't worry about mercury and chrome and cadmium and other toxins that pollute the air and cause our children to have asthma. Just don't do that. Don't have any regulations. Just go about your business, and we would then find ourselves in mass confusion with people with premature deaths that are unnecessary. We can do this. We can have a conscience and a brain, and we can make money in this country. We've done it in the past. We will do it in the future. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule and the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent.
Mr. Speaker, once again I want to thank my colleague from Florida for his eloquent words. It is about America getting back on track. It is about America worrying about regulations that are going to kill jobs. As I mentioned earlier, the President even's concerned that overregulation by the EPA would do just that. Kill jobs when we can least afford. If you look at this act, what we're talking about doing is not eliminating anything. It's about saying 15 months to get it together, the EPA, to look at it, and let's not kill jobs in America. It gives 5 years then for those businesses that I've met with that are more than willing to do their fair share to keep the air that we breathe and the water that we drink clean and pure. I live in Florida. Mr. Hastings lives in Florida. We depend upon clean air and water in Florida just like many other states. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this rule and encourage my colleagues to support it as well. Despite what the President Obama and Vice President Biden would have you think, giving a bus tour and the Vice President being in Land O'Lakes, Florida, speeches don't create jobs. For the President, it may be a joke to say that shovel-ready jobs, you know, weren't just as shovel-ready as we thought with the first stimulus package. But the American people footed that bill, and it's no joke to them. Mr. President and Mr. Vice President need to recognize the reality that H.R. 2250 and H.R. 2681 recognize that jobs are not created in a vacuum. The government creates an environment which job creators operate. Regulations like Boiler Act and Cement Act do nothing to encourage industry to invest in America. Instead, they force employers to shut their doors, move jobs overseas, or just across the border to Mexico. They force us to lose our manufacturing base and import cement from countries like China. I'm proud to play a part in rolling back this type of regulation. I encourage my colleagues to join me in this effort by supporting House Res 419 and the underlying bills H.R. 2250 and H.R. 2681. With that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
Yes, sir. Oh, okay.
The yeas and nays have been requested. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 2608.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the unanimous consent agreement of yesterday, I call up the bill H.R. 2608 with the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment thereto, and have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the title of the bill, designate the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment, and report the motion.
H.R. 2608, an act to provide for additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the order of the House of
Senate amendment to House amendment to Senate amendment. Mr. Rogers of Kentucky moves that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 2608.
Pursuant to the order of the House of Monday, October 3, 2011, the motion shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consent.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to bring to the floor the continuing appropriation resolutions to keep the federal government operating until November 18, 2011, and to continue support for disaster relief projects. This version of the bill, which is virtually identical to the one the House voted on last week, funds the government at a rate of $1.043 trillion and provides $2.65 billion in fiscal year 2012 funding for the Federal Emergency Management Agency and other disaster aid programs. However, this bill no longer includes $1 billion in emergency fiscal year 2011 funding for FEMA and the Corps of Engineers, nor the offset for those funds. The Senate dropped these provisions after the White House and FEMA suddenly, and I might add mysteriously, announced that these funds were no longer necessary. While in the short term, FEMA says it can get by without the additional emergency funding, it's clear that the agency will soon need additional money to continue ongoing relief and recovery efforts from recent devastating natural disasters. I'm disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that the agency has apparently been playing games with the numbers. And my committee is closely examining why FEMA's estimates changed at the 11th hour. The committee also remains committed to providing the proper amount of emergency assistance that families and communities across the country rely upon. Mr. Speaker, we have now entered into the new fiscal year, and we need to keep the doors of the government open to the American people who rely on its programs and its services. We simply must not leave our citizens in the lurch, particularly as thousands of American families and communities continue to rebuild following devastating natural disasters across the country. Furthermore, our economy can't handle the instability that comes from the threat of a government shutdown. This bill supports vital government operations, but still saves the American taxpayers billions of dollars by maintaining the overall funding level agreed to in the recently enacted Budget Control Act. We are committed to reining in spending at every step, and this reduced funding rate will help our nation return to more sound fiscal footing. In addition, this legislation gives both the House and the Senate more time to finish our work on the fiscal 2012 appropriations bills, legislation that will continue the trend of reducing federal spending to more responsible and sustainable levels. The House has made great progress on this year's appropriations bills, and I intend to wrap up this work as quickly as possible to provide for the economic and fiscal security of our nation and the needs of the American public. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I reserve.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the CR before us runs through November 18th. The CR continues funding at last year's level, minus 1.053%, to ensure that spending is limited to $1.043 trillion, the amount agreed to in the Budget Control Act. Democrats voted no previously for two reasons. We strongly oppose taking funding from the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program. This is a program that has proven to be a success in creating jobs. The Department of Energy estimates the loan guarantees have created or maintained 39,000 jobs in California, Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, and Tennessee. The pending applications will create more jobs. The money received by the companies is paid back to the government. We strongly oppose the notion that efforts to help Americans rebuild their lives after floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters should be put on hold until Congress can agree on offsetting reductions in spending. FY12 has begun, so there is no need for FY11 disaster relief funding in the CR. In early versions, House Republicans had insisted on offsetting 11 disaster relief funding. The CR under consideration today no longer cuts funding for ATVM and does not require an offset. I urge a yes vote, and I yield back the balance.
Gentleman from Washington yields back his time. The gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time is expired pursuant to the order of House of Monday, October 3rd, 2011. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion by the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is delayed upon
Mr. Speaker, I ask
from Kentucky.
For the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Why can't we just... Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
The House is coming back shortly. We expect when they